Now I'd like to introduce our presenter. Tierney Smith is the Manager of Learning and Special Projects at TechSoup Canada, where she works to build technology capacity in the non-profit sector. She also has experience developing software in the corporate sector and has a degree in software engineering from the University of Waterloo. She has her own blog, which you can find out more about what she does, and follow her on Twitter at TierneyS. And with that, I'd like to pass you over to Tierney, who'll take us through today's presentation. Over to you, Tierney.
Excellent. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. As Claire said, my name is Tierney, and I'm here today from TechSoup Canada to talk to you a bit about cloud computing and nonprofits and how this applies to you. So just a little bit of background for any of you who aren't familiar with TechSoup Canada. What we do is our mission is to help nonprofits make use of technology more effectively. So we run a software donations program that's open to charities, nonprofits, and libraries in Canada. If you fall into that category and aren't registered with us, definitely check out what we have to offer. We've got software donations from companies such as Microsoft, Adobe, etc. And we've also got a lot of resources on our site in terms of how you can learn to use technology more effectively. And then we also do events, stuff like the one today. And I just realized I've got notifications for my email. So I'm just going to spare you some trouble here and really quickly close that. Apologies for the inconvenience there. Closing email. Okay, now back onto the presentation. See, all of us have little technology issues even when we work at TechSoup Canada, so don't feel bad. Okay, so, and as Claire said, I'm in charge of basically everything that has to do with learning, community, and any special projects that we're working on. You can find, I blog at the TechSoup Canada blog, which you can find online, and I'm also usually the one if you're talking to us on Twitter and Facebook and asking questions, I'm usually the one you'll be talking to as well there. So, actually, before we get into the agenda, I wanted to find out a little bit about you guys to get a feel who's on the webinar today. So I'm just going to do a little poll to find out how big an organization you're from, because this will just give me a feel for who's around. So if you would take just 2 seconds to do this, then that would be great, and we can go from there. So far I'm seeing a lot of really small organizations and a few that are larger. Okay, almost everyone. Just a couple other people need to vote. Is there anyone else who still hasn't voted yet? I'll just give you a couple seconds to do that. And then I'm going to close the poll and show the results to everybody. Okay, that's almost everyone. So, so now you can, you should all be able to see the poll results. So basically what we have today, the mix that we've got on the call, so about 32% of you are from a really small organization. We've got a few that are medium-sized and then a couple that are quite big. So the reason I wanted to ask you guys about the specific question is because how and when and if you want to move to the cloud, really, I think it does really relate to the number of staff that you have in your organization. So I'll be getting around to that a bit at the end and talking about how that plays into things. But anyway, thank you for that, and now we'll move on with our presentation. So I hope you can all see my screen right now, and Claire, send me an urgent message if you can't. Today's agenda, we're going to talk about what is the cloud. I think it's always important to just review this, and get everyone on the same page. And then we're going to talk about how it's relevant to your nonprofit, look at some tools, talk about the costs, advantages, and risks, those questions that are really important for everyone to know, and then talk a little bit about how you might want to get started. And then so as Claire said, I'm happy to answer questions throughout the presentation, but also have some time at the end for answering questions and doing any additional demos that you may want to see, because we'll have limited time for that during the presentation. So if there's something that you're particularly interested in, let us know and we'll try to make some time after the presentation if it's something that I know anything about. So onwards and upwards. Okay, what is the cloud? So I like to start off with these great quotes from a study that was done in the US, and I'm sure Canada is not too much different. My favorite stat is that 1 in 5 Americans admit they've pretended to know what the cloud is. So if you've ever been in a situation, this is why I didn't ask you who here knows what the cloud is, because I don't want you to feel the need to awkwardly put up your hand, and virtually, of course, even if you're not quite sure what it is. So we're going to get you all on the same page right now. So the most important thing to know about the cloud as we get started is that the majority of you have already used the cloud, even if you're not aware of it, even if it's not a term you've ever heard before. In your personal life, you probably use it for things like online banking, online shopping, social networking, etc. And so the question is, how does this fit in with your work? So the way I would define the cloud, there's different versions of it, but my definition is that cloud is basically a scalable service that you access through the internet. So what does that mean? So first, let's just focus on the services you access through the internet. So in the past, basically you would usually install software on your computer, and it would just run on your computer, you would save files on your computer, etc. Or you might have a server in your organization that multiple computers could connect to, and software would be installed on the server and run off the server, you would store your files on the server, etc. So what's different about the cloud is that instead of running programs and storing files on your computer or on a server, you actually store them in somewhere else that you don't see, and you access it through the internet. Effectively, what's happening in the background is it is being stored on servers. Organizations will run big data centers where they have lots and lots and lots of servers all together, and they will look after maintaining them. But you don't need to worry about any of that. All you need to know is that you are accessing it through the internet online. So, and what do I mean by scalable? Well, the thing is, if you are in your organization and you have something on your computer, you have something on your server, and then all of a sudden you need to accommodate more people, it may or may not be easy. Maybe you have to buy new hardware to accommodate that. However, being in the cloud, and we'll get back to this a bit later, it makes it really easy to scale up and down because you're usually paying on a pay-per-use model. So again, we'll get back to that. But for now, scalable services you access through the internet. A really simple example to demonstrate this point is the difference between Microsoft Word and Google Docs, and I think most people are familiar with both of these applications. If you're not, I'll be showing you Google Docs in a second. So Microsoft Word or a similar program like OpenOffice is basically running on your computer, usually, and you're saving files to a computer or to maybe a network drive on your server. Now, Google Docs is a very similar application in that it's basically same word processing, a lot of the same features, maybe a little bit less features than Word has. But, you know, again, you're doing a lot of the same things that you're used to doing in Word. However, there's a couple of big differences. One of them is that instead of running on your desktop, the program is running in your browser. So you open up your browser window, you navigate to Google Docs, log in, and then you're ready to go. The other big difference is, again, where it's saving files. So instead of with Microsoft Word, where you're saving files on your computer, with Google Docs, you're saving files on the internet, on the Google Cloud, and then you're always accessing those through the internet. So this is a really simple example. There's definitely a lot of variations. No, not everything has these strict, clear-cut boundaries, but I think it's a good initial example to illustrate what we're talking about here. Just again to reinforce that you probably already are familiar with cloud apps, even if you don't know a lot about what that term means. So here's a few examples of other apps you might have heard of that are all running in the cloud. Now, before I also get into more demos and examples and talking about the cloud, I also want to clarify that really, from a technical perspective, there's actually 3 different types of cloud. So what I've been talking about so far is what's called software as a service. So it's basically somebody else has built a piece of software in the same way that somebody built out what we call out-of-the-box software, like Microsoft Word and Microsoft Office. There's now software as a service. So somebody's built a software that runs online. It's usually on a subscription basis that you pay for it, or maybe it's free. And again, you access it through the internet. So Google Docs, which we just talked about, is a good example of software as a service. It's already built. You're accessing it through the internet. But there's actually other ways that this idea of the cloud, these like big data centers that you're accessing through the internet, can be used. The second one is platform as a service. So this is really relevant if you are developing software. So for a lot of small organizations and nonprofits, this won't really apply so much to you. You can forget I mentioned this. But for a larger organization that maybe is actually building software yourself, you may want to look into platform as a service and consider actually developing software in an online cloud environment rather than having to set up an environment in-house. So for example, if you're building Salesforce apps, you're going to be building that on the force.com platform, which is in the cloud. The third type of cloud, which I think does apply again to all sizes of organizations, is the infrastructure as a service. So basically what you're looking at here is that it is pure, raw server storage space in the cloud. So in other words, instead of buying a physical server, putting it in your office, buying all the Windows Server, all the stuff to run on it, setting it up with backup and security and whatnot, and then maybe you exceed that server's capacity, you have to buy a new server, etc. So instead of that whole scenario, you're basically renting server space in the cloud. And you, again, like I mentioned before, the advantage here is that you only have to pay for what you use. So if you need more space one month, less space the next month, or more bandwidth one month, less the next month, you can completely accommodate that. The other thing is that you don't have to worry about all of the backup and security issues, because that's often looked after for you, depending on the platform. So if you're considering running a more traditional server software and you want to have it in the cloud so it's available to you everywhere and have some of the other benefits we're going to talk about in a minute, infrastructure as a service is something to consider. So again, I just, for most of you, we're really going to be talking about software as a service, but I just want to put all of these on your radar so you're aware of the scope of what we're talking about with the cloud. So I think this is a good opportunity, now that I've hopefully given you an idea of what the cloud is, to just stop for a minute, and I want to hear from you guys. So I want to hear, what are the tools that you're already using that are in the cloud, whether in your personal lives or in your work. Let's share some of them, and then we can see what each other are using. So for this demo, this little exercise, we're actually going to be using Google Docs. So I'm just going to switch over here. So if you could all click on that link, which Claire is also going to share in the chat and is also here. I've set this Google document to open edit for everybody. So if you want to just type in the tools that you use, we'll get a feel for what other people do, and we'll see what shared editing in Google Docs actually looks like while we're at it. Okay, so as I watch people put stuff in and keep entering it, I'm definitely seeing a lot of Google Docs here, a couple on a Google Apps suite. Okay, some eTapestry, so that's donations software, donations management. Definitely a few Dropbox, so for sharing files. Some social networking tools, which of course are always in the cloud. Okay, thank you, the orchestra person. I was actually wondering what that was. Very interesting. Would love to hear. I need to look more into that one. I haven't heard of that before. Anyone got anything else to add? Wunderlist, another one that I haven't heard of. I'll have to look into that. There's so many cloud tools out there. You never know what's going to be out there. Okay, so a bit of data entry, Google Fusion, online marketing tools, interesting. Okay, some really good ones here that I haven't even heard of all of these, which just goes to show you the breadth of all the tools in the cloud. Excellent. So I think at this point, Evernote. I just fell in love with Evernote recently, so I'm really excited about that. Thank you for sharing all of that. And so hopefully what you saw here, first of all, is get a feel for what kind of tools each other are using, what kind of tools are popular, but also got a little feel for what it's like to be in Google Drive or in Google Docs. So for anyone who hasn't used this tool before, I like to do it as a demo because, again, if you haven't seen it, it's quite similar to Microsoft Word. You've got a lot of this formatting stuff, but you've got a few different other things. So while we're here, I'll show you a couple of aspects of Google Doc. One of them is sharing. So one of the first questions that always comes up about the cloud, and we're going to revisit this later as well, is the question of how does it work in terms of privacy and security. And in Google Drive, Google Docs and Drive in particular, the way it works is that you control the sharing with different levels. So basically, here are the different options I can have. And you might, with different programs, you might not have the exact same options, but this kind of range of possibilities is pretty common. So I could make this public on the web, so it's completely searchable to anyone. I can do what I did in this case, so I could say anybody with the link can access. So that's why I had to share the link with you guys before you could know about this document. But I don't need you to sign in, which is really nice in scenarios where you really want to get that cloud input. It's not really important to me which exact one of you wrote each thing in this document. Where it might be if it was if I was creating a critical organization document, I might want to be able to track exactly which person made each change. But in this scenario, it's more important to me to get your input and to make that really easy than it is to know exactly who changed what. Since I'm using Google Apps, which I'll mention later, I can have the option to only let anyone in my organization find and access this document, or just people at TechSoup Canada with the link, or it's only private, so it's only the people that I've actually given permission to. And I can also change it between, can you edit, or I could have done this so you could only view it, but you couldn't have made any changes, or so you could comment. And as well, there's always the option to add individuals at different levels of sharing. So if I wanted to add specific people, I could do that. And then you can see it's pulling it from my address book, and then an email would be sent to them to let them know I had shared this with them. So that's one quick thing I wanted to show about Google Docs, to again illustrate that one of the advantages of the cloud is sharing, and it makes it really easy when you're sharing just one document as opposed to emailing things back and forth. The other feature I quickly want to show you about Google Docs is the revision history. So one of the concerns when you think about, okay, how are you going to integrate this within your organization, is what happens if somebody puts something you don't want, what if they delete something by accident, etc. So that's where the revision history comes in handy, basically what we see is a list of all the changes that were made to this document, and I could actually roll back at any point to an older version, and you would see that, so in this case you'd see in blue the thing that was added in in between this version and the version before, where I could go back to the version before that, and I could see what was added just in this version. So I always have the option to go back to something before. I'm not losing any of that detail. So let us go back to our presentation and continue. Thank you everyone for that. So let's talk a bit about how this plays in with you as a nonprofit. So are nonprofits using the cloud? The TechSoup Global Network, which is actually a worldwide network, we're in more than 40 countries now, did a survey last March of nonprofits, NGOs, charities, etc., around the world to find out whether nonprofits are embracing the cloud or not, what are the barriers, etc. And you can get the full report on our site. The link is at the bottom there. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of things here at the presentation. So the first one is that in Canada, 93% of organizations that answered our survey use at least one cloud app. And I don't have the specific Canadian data for this next stat, but overall worldwide, organizations use 3 to 4 types of cloud apps. So, you know, because if you're using just one cloud app, that might be just social media, so which doesn't really show much adoption of cloud. But it's interesting to see that there definitely is there is a trend towards cloud in the nonprofit sector, which is, of course, no doubt why most of you are here today. So how does so the thing about cloud that I think it's important for you to understand at this stage as well is that the cloud isn't one specific tool. The cloud is not Google Docs. The cloud is not Google. The cloud is more of a description of a way of getting software. So in the same way that there's all sorts of different programs that you can download onto your desktop, there's all sorts of different programs you can download onto you can access in the cloud. So in the same way that you have to be strategic about what programs you want on your desktop, it's like, okay, do we need to do graphic design? Therefore, maybe we want Adobe or an open source product to help us do that. Or maybe we want to do word processing, so we want to get Microsoft Office or OpenOffice. In the same way with cloud software, to know what you should get, you need to know what you're trying to do. It's not, are we in the cloud, are we not in the cloud? You have to look at each goal that you're trying to accomplish, each area, and consider what is the best tool for that purpose, and maybe it's in the cloud. And the point is that if it is in the cloud, it's going to come with a set of associated principles and advantages and disadvantages, and that's more what we're going to talk about. So I want you to understand, coming out of this webinar, if someone says to you, oh, there's this tool and it's in the cloud, then you're going to know, okay, well, if it's in the cloud, it means that some of the benefits are that it's easier for sharing, collaboration, and access, but some of the risks are around, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I want you to understand the implications, but it's not a matter of being in the cloud or not in the cloud. It really depends on your specific what you're trying to do. So these are, it's a little brainstorm I did. You can tell my drawing skills aren't too good, but of a few of the types of core functionality that nonprofits have to do just to keep doing their work, right? I mean, in your back office, you need that email, you need your office productivity software to do word processing, spreadsheets, you need some kind of database, hopefully to be tracking your donors or volunteers or whoever's most important to you. You need some kind of communication tools, you need some place to store your files, you need a way to engage with your constituents. So these are a few examples of things that you need to do, and there's non-cloud, like out-of-the-box or server applications that will do each of these. And here are some of the ones that are in the cloud. So you may have heard of these or you may not. And again, if you are interested in more of them and I don't end up doing a demo, feel free to ask and we'll see if I can talk about it more in the Q&A period. But again, so starting off, to illustrate my point about it being, it's about your goal and not about just getting excited of the cloud for its own sake, I wanted to share this example of using Google Docs with your board. So this is a case study actually from an organization called the Bhutan Canada Foundation, and they send teachers to work in the Kingdom of Bhutan, and they were trying to figure out, they're a very small organization, I think 2 or 3 staff, and they wanted to find a more effective way to work with their board because they were spending a lot of time photocopying everything before the board meeting, all sorts of different challenges like that. Board members didn't know where to go to find documents, etc. And I think this is a pretty common challenge among nonprofits. And so what they did was they set up Google Docs to use with their board, and I won't show you theirs because I don't have access to it, but I can quickly show you what our Google Docs account looks like. So before I showed you a specific Google document, and now I'm going to show you the what's called, well, it's now, sorry, the name has been changed now to Google Drive, which is a little bit confusing, but you might still be on Google Docs. So what you're seeing here is it's kind of like what you'd see in my computer if you're using a Windows PC on your desktop. or in Apple, whatever the name of the file structure is there. But on the left, I've got a whole bunch of different folders for all the different things that I need to do. And on the right, I have all the things that are in that folder. So if I look under what's a good folder, if I look under the blog, I have a whole bunch of documents where I've written drafts of blog posts. And the cool thing about this is that you can share at a folder level as well as at an individual document level. So, and it looks pretty much the same. So what this allowed the Bhutan Canada Foundation to do is to create a folder with some subfolders, and then they just shared that whole folder with the people on their board in order to make sure that they had access to all the files they need. And you can see here on the left, they've subdivided their files into things like administrative issues, board meeting minutes, committees, finance, etc. So basically, their board members all had access to these files in one place. They could find it at any time they wanted. Now, some of you may have actually tried to do this. Some of you may have succeeded, and some of you may have not succeeded and said, you know, our board hated Google Docs, they wouldn't do it, so we went back to paper. So one of the things that I think is interesting about this particular story is that they put a lot of emphasis on training of their board members and really made it a gradual and very supported transition. So they took the time and they prepared a presentation, which you can they actually shared on at this link at the bottom, to walk their board members through this approach, how to use Google Docs, what they could expect about this. And then they gradually reinforced it over time. For example, by only putting the board documents on Google Docs, eventually forced people to adopt it. And then, of course, we're there to support when there was any confusion or concerns. And gradually, now they're at a point where they're using it really successfully. They don't have all these worries they had in the past. So it was both a matter of understanding their goal and finding the right tool to fit that goal and implementing it, and also really understanding the cultural considerations, what it was that their board members wanted, and really making the transition a smooth process for them. So I think, and many of you may have experienced this already, when it comes to transitioning to any new tool, the cloud included, it's about picking the right technology tool, but it's also really about those people considerations. What is it that people want? How can you create something that will work for them, not just for you? And how do you do that transition smoothly so people feel confident, they feel trained, they're on board with what you're doing? So a few other examples of, again, just to illustrate the breadth of tools that are available in the cloud. These are some different ways that, again, common nonprofit tasks and in areas where you need to work, and some examples of cloud tools that fall in each of those categories. So stuff like, you could use a cloud tool for sending out your emails if you're not doing that already. You could use a cloud tool for project management, which is excellent because often you're managing people not in the same location, so having something online really helps. Or maybe it's, you're doing a survey. Some of you mentioned using SurveyMonkey, etc. So again, we can happy to come back to any of these ones if there's a particular interest. So just wanted to sum up so far what I've alluded to a lot of these, but I want to just recap some of the main benefits of using the cloud. So first of all, sharing, right? So we've I've kind of talked around this a bit. But the thing is, when something is in the cloud, it makes it much easier to share because usually you just have to point someone to something with a link rather than actually send them a copy of a file. And when you send copies of a file, like maybe emailing a Word document, that's when you get the, okay, here's version 1, you get back version 2, soon you have version 3.4892. Then someone starts working on the wrong version, and that's where things sort of start to fall apart. So having easy sharing in the cloud makes it really easy to always be sharing the same version of everything and everyone be in the same place. Sharing also, you'll notice if you're active on social networks, anything that's in the cloud is much easier to share. Often you can just share things easily with a link. It's like, here, point towards this or embed it in a website versus having to download a document or something like that.
Tierney?
The second main benefit that I really see, yes.
I just had a couple of questions.
Sorry, it's okay. Yeah, no problem. I will be
Um,
happy to answer those. I just jumped out of my chair a
oh,
couple
I'm
feet, but
sorry.
that's okay.
Surprise. I have a question from Joe about the Google Docs, asking if board members need to have a Google account to share and see all of the documents.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good question. Let me go back to Google Docs for a minute. So, so with Google Docs, it depends on how you set up the sharing. So if you want people to be really actively engaged and working on documents with you, like in the scenario of the board, I would recommend it is best for them to have a Google account. Because that's what's going to be most effective in terms of working together. Because as I said, if you have people with specific accounts, you can actually track what it is that they're doing and the changes that they made, and you can share with those specific people. So, I mean, I think there is a way to share with people without Google accounts. I think you can share with other email addresses, but in my experience, I haven't really ever found a way to completely make it work.
Okay, fantastic.
So, yeah.
And just one more question, and it's
Mm-hmm.
about the eliminating of the confusion with different versions. And
Yes.
Douglas is asking if Dropbox allows you to eliminate this version confusion in the same way that Google Docs does.
Yes, absolutely. So this is again, a common property of the cloud. Google Docs is one way to create documents online and share them, but Dropbox and so there's actually I'll just go back. So Dropbox and similar applications, which are like Google Drive, Box.net, and SkyDrive, are all good comparable applications. They all, of course, eliminate that same function. I mean, and to be honest, I mean, having a server network drive should also eliminate the same problem in a way, except for sometimes what you get is you still do want to store multiple copies of files because you're not really confident that easy backup is there, whereas some of these file sharing tools, and I can't tell you too much about this off the top of my head, but have a little bit of that history built in, and it's really easy to go back to past versions of files. So
Great.
So yes, sharing a file in Dropbox, you're both accessing the same copy of that. And I will say, actually, so before I kind of alluded to Google Drive versus Google Docs, the change that happened that Google made recently was to, in the past, you could upload non-Google Docs to your Google Docs account, but it wasn't really that useful a feature. Whereas now they've actually allowed you, Google Drive is actually more like Dropbox because you can have it on your computer as well and be able to access the files right on your computer, and it'll be synchronized with online in the same way Dropbox is synchronized with online.
Oh.
So actually, if you look at here on my screen, I actually have all 4 of these: Dropbox, Box, Google Drive, and SkyDrive. And in all of the cases, you've got the folders. You can see that it's syncing with online, and I can just access it with the rest of my files. And again, most of these folders are shared with someone else in my organization, so they can access it as well, and we're always accessing the same copy of stuff provided it's synced. So yes, Google Drive is the same thing. So I've got here a mix of traditional documents like Excel spreadsheets and Google documents.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tierney. That's all the questions for now.
Yeah, no problem. And keep asking those questions as they come up.